The sales robots have taken over, and they're decimating deals left and right, destroying them right in their tracks. On the AI for Sales podcast, our mission is to empower everyday sellers to embrace AI superpowers to build new bridges and crush quota. Dr. Joel Abon said it best in the AI for Sales book. In sales, time kills deals. In AI for Sales, AI kills time. Join our hosts as we learn from the C-suite of the world's fastest growing companies about how you can leverage AI today to transform your sales revenue engine while being the best version of you.
Welcome back to another podcast on the AI for Sales podcast. I'm here today with a company that I heard about nearly 5 years ago. And this is an Australian-based company that's moved to the US and has been leveraging AI for a lot longer than a lot of companies have. So before it was cool is how I like to think of it. So I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan Porter-Whistman, the CEO of a company called PerceptionPredict. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Chad. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Well, we had a good dialogue before we clicked the go button and my browser crashed. So I'm excited to bring that to our audience today. Before we go there to the AI stuff that we always like to talk about, I'd love to help our audience connect with you as a person by going back and rewinding the tape. Where were you raised? What was your passion when you were younger, to help connect the dots to what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I was raised in Washington State, and I grew up in a family with 8 kids. And I grew up in a cult, actually. Odd way to start your podcast. But, when you think about what was I obsessed with at a young age, I would actually have to say survival. Because the whole concept of the cult was the world's ending, right? And you got to save people. So I really was focused on how do I save all these people from the end of the world? And fortunately, since left that, but also my family was sort of violent. So it was just like a survival instinct growing up. And it wasn't until I left that I feel like I really got to live life. Although I learned a lot of great lessons out of that that's helped me in my business career. You probably haven't heard that answer at the beginning of a podcast, right?
I love it because there's so many. I have another podcast and it's called You Matter to Christ. And it's a podcast about the trials and tribulations that people have and how they find their faith. And quite often it's through those tough times in life where it's like, there's got to be something bigger than this,
Yeah. Well, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, uncles, generationally in this group. And, when you're surrounded by all of the people that are your mentors in life and they see things a certain way, it doesn't occur to you that that things might be different in the wider world, and so you just expect that. And one of the things was it didn't really matter what you were obsessed with or curious about, because the world was ending and a select few were going to be saved. On the other side of that salvation, you could be obsessed with anything you wanted, but right now you just had to be obsessed.
You just focus on
staying alive.
Wow, that's right. Really interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
That's for another podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. A lot of times I think those things help explain the drive that we have in our lives. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so disappointed in what I came out of. And it's like, no, it got me to where I am, right?
It's interesting that you say that because, somebody could look back on that and have all regret. And I really don't. And one of the things that I would say I did become obsessed with was what makes humans tick? How do they think? What's their background? Because spending a lot of time, going, knocking on people's doors, trying to convert them into a certain way of thinking. And there was no real upside to this for them other than, salvation, packaged in some way. And so you really started getting an understanding of how do people think about their lives? How do they, what are their core values? Where did they come from? And that fascination with people and belief, I think has carried through with every business that I've done.
Wow. Well, PerceptionPredict certainly has a name to go along with those kinds of things. So talk to me about AI in your world. you can either answer the question one of two ways, right? What are you most excited about AI solving? Take Perception Predict out of it. Or what are you excited about inside of Perception Predict that you're able to do that's huge?
Yeah, there's sort of two different things. You mentioned Perception doing AI before it was cool, and I came across Perception sort of late in the game. They had already gotten started. It's a great story. It was started by a woman who literally grew up in a rice paddy in Taiwan, no running water, no electricity, first of her family to go to college. And she had this curiosity about data scientists and IO psychology, what makes people tick. And a lot of the products on the market, you can take a pre-hire assessment, right? Like a DISC or a PI or something like that. And it's going to tell you fit for role. But what she was curious about is she understood that most business people don't care if you're introverted, extroverted, you have grit, you don't have grit, you're intelligent, you're not intelligent. What they actually care about is if I hire Chad, is he going to do the work, and is he going to do it at a high level of skill, and is he going to stay around long enough to accrue benefit to my company? Mm-hmm. And so she started on that path. She's a great data scientist, great IO psychologist. When I came across them at the time, as you mentioned, the company was based in Australia. I was fortunate enough to be able to get vested in the company. And so it's myself and the two founders. We relocated the company here to the US, even though we have international clients, sort of the heartbeat of businesses here in the US. But in terms of AI, as we think about it, it's really advanced pattern recognition and advanced mathematics. I think it's cool for people, that say, oh, they slap an AI label on things. But weak AI, the sort of AI that we have today, and I would include ChatGPT as being weak or narrow AI, it really is just advanced mathematics and pattern recognition. And the thing that has changed is our compute power has gotten better. And so we can run bigger algorithms. We can identify bigger patterns. And so what we're able to do in organizations, you work in that area of SDR, BDRs, sales organizations, as an example, we're able to, when somebody applies for the job, regardless of their background, regardless of gender or any of the other things, they take a 15-minute pre-hire online assessment, and we output a prediction about that person. We say they're going to sell $250 a quarter or $250,000 a quarter. They're going to close X number of deals, and we're putting that in the language that's important to our clients. And our predictions get to within 15 to 20%. So you see this massive reduction in early tenure churn. You see people ramping much more quickly, because when you hire somebody that's uniquely built for a role, they're naturally going to enjoy their job and they're going to stick and stay. So I'm excited about, how do we add in emerging AI, new technologies when you think about ChatGPT and those sort of things. It's going to be a fun world to explore. But if we go to your broader question, what am I most excited about for the world? I think it's specifically related to solving some of the biggest challenges the earth faces. So just think about just in medicine, right? You can go to a doctor, let's say you get cancer, you can go to a doctor, trained in that. They've just gone to med school. Maybe they go to a couple of conferences a year to keep sharp. They read maybe a couple of, med reports coming out. But that's a really sort of narrow view. And what AI allows us to do is to look at every single case of cancer for every single patient and be able to say, hey, this cancer that Jonathan has is exactly like these other two people over here, and this is the treatment that worked. And a human's just not capable of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to solve some really big, even like climate change, all of those things just require the ability to identify a pattern at scale. I tend to think of it, and we talked about this before we, hit record on this. If you're in an airplane and you're going down the runway and you're looking out the window, when you're at 100 feet or 200 feet, you only see, right, the buildings. Maybe you see a couple of grass fields, the roads. when you get up to 10,000 feet and you look down, because you have such a broader point of view, you start to see patterns. If you're going through the Midwest, you start seeing the pattern of the cornfields are square, or maybe in this area, there's just this repeating round harvesting circle. And that's the way I like to think of AI, because as it exists today, it is just pattern recognition. The difference is it can take in massive amounts of data. And so the perspective that it has is interesting.
I love that. I'm a skier growing up in Colorado. So there's a boot insert called Carve. And I remember 5 years ago, I got an email, would you like a free one? And I was like, yes. And then I missed my window, so didn't get it. But I keep seeing the ads, and it's got all these little pressure points that goes in the insole, connects up to your phone, and then coaches you. Am I leaning too much forward? I mean, just looking across all the different skiers and the best skiers in the world, if you want to be like one of those, then lean here, do this, do that. So, the analogy that you just shared makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the ability to translate data at scale and make it usable is what's interesting, is to filter out the noise and say, here are the things that are important. I think when you look at like sales organizations today, which, with my book, The Sales Boss, I have spent years in helping build enterprise organizations. There's a lot of data coming at someone. And the reality is, if you have, let's say you have 8 back-to-back appointments as a salesperson every day, by the time you get to the end of 2 weeks, I don't care how good you are, even a great lead coming in is sort of going to be fuzzy in your head. Right. And no salesperson really loves their CRM until they, you have to put a lot of effort into it, and all of a sudden it becomes your servant and it's helping you. And I think using AI to enable that part of the sales process is super interesting. Already when I get off a call, I'm using tools that transcribe it, shorten the notes, post those notes into my CRM system, automatically adds sort of the to-do checklist. That sort of thing is really helpful for somebody in sales, right up until the moment we replace them.
Yeah. I talked to a company, I'm blanking on the name right now, but they're on the podcast recently. I should remember. And their vision is to capture it all, do all of that. And they're kind of calling that table stakes, right? Then they want to be able to convert it into a PowerPoint so that the rep doesn't have to put the notes in, because a lot of reps are not good at listening and converting what the customer says in their words into the first couple slides of the PowerPoint. So pretty neat little business problem to solve, I think.
I was actually on a customer service call. I was the customer calling in, so horror right off the bat. You're going to call a customer service line. I was 10 minutes into a fairly complex call before I realized I wasn't talking to a human.
Wow.
And I'm really tech forward. I'm spending time in this. I'm writing models for our platform, currently, and testing those and looking to the future. And, I'm the beta sign up person for everything AI. And it was just a glitch in the matrix that made me go, wait a minute, this is not a human on the other side of the phone. But that wouldn't have been true even 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what I think most businesses and certainly consumers don't realize is how fast things are changing. And they really need to think through their own business, but also themselves just as a human on this planet. Like, what does the shape of the future look like when many of the jobs that are being done today are augmented with AI or entirely replaced with AI? And what do we do? In the past, it's been pretty safe to say that when jobs have been replaced, they've been replaced with other, usually higher paying jobs, more interesting jobs. You can get to a point where you could conceive a world where you're actually not creating net new jobs. So if you think about an AI, and you could even say outside of AI, with robotics that are able to function and do many of the things humans do, but also can build additional replacement, because it used to be if you build a robot, you've gotten great engineering jobs, right? To build the next robot and to do the software coding and fix bugs and all of the other things you do. But you don't have to really go too far out in the future to imagine a world where the humanoid robot that's doing the physical labor was built by another robot. And when that software degrades, that they're recoding your own software, because you can get into almost every coder on the planet right now is using the Copilot inside of their programming languages. They're as much as 90% of the code that they're writing is pre-written for them. So wow. I do think we'll get to a point where we through technology, we're actually not creating net new jobs. And some people find that, scary. And I do, only in the sense that I don't know that our thinking is evolved enough to take a honest, transparent look at it. But imagine a world where your identity has nothing to do with what you do as a job, because there isn't enough jobs. Like you couldn't possibly employ mankind at 40-hour a week jobs, nor would you need to. And that opens up the ability to really think about, well, what would I do with my life if, and you can think through history. I mean, people, their 10 hours of their day plus used to be spent just hunting, trying to get enough food, taking their laundry down, to the creek and washing it and hauling water in. And as technology improved, now we needed TVs, because what else are you going to do in the evening, right? And we start trying to find ways to entertain ourselves, because entertainment didn't used to be as big a thing in our lives, because you actually had to just focus on survival. Am I putting enough food away and canning it and prepping for the winter? And do I have enough firewood put away? Then we got microwaves and washing machines, and very shortly, the jobs we wake up and do every day just simply won't need us. And then what? Like, we're not going to entertain 100% of the time. What are you going to do? I think that's exciting. And we get in this really polarized political environment. So there's think tanks spending a lot of time thinking about universal basic income. Man, that's like lighting a fire in, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or some other, mixture. Like, it's so polarizing. But we will have to, as a society, get to a point where Chad has a right to live and have a quality of life, regardless of what he does for work, even if he does nothing, because the work as we value it today actually won't exist.
Yes. You're the first person that I've actually 100% agree on that, because I do tend to lean Republican. And so my family would be like, wait a second. I say my family, most of my family, there's a few in it that are like, oh no, universal basic income. And that's one where I say absolutely, because of what I see happening here. And you've just so well articulated it. I 1,000,000% agree with everything you just said.
And there's a lot of versions, sort of falling under that umbrella. But I think we at least have to have an open conversation, right? And the whole, argument is, well, I don't allow people just to be lazy and, still. So
yeah, right. They may not be able to walk around with the Rolex, but
it doesn't actually detract. And there's been a bunch of research. For most people, it doesn't actually detract from their desire to have meaning in their life and do meaningful things. And what does that mean? Well, maybe I want to be an artist or a musician, and because I have a safety net, I can pursue that. And it may mean that I have a lower standard of living, right, than somebody that also has that basic income, but then finds a way to, pursue something and get a capitalistic sort of return. But what it prevents is people falling into homelessness and destitute because of a lack of jobs or a sudden change in jobs. And taking that risk out of society, I think actually helps everyone, because fool yourself if you want. Mm-hmm. You may say you don't want to pay for those things, but you are. you're paying for the person that's homeless. You're paying for the person that's addicted to drugs. You're paying, like, our health system has a tax in it for the people that can't pay. We're going to pay it one way or the other. The question just becomes, can we pay it in a way that's more humane and actually reduces our costs long term?
Wow. Okay. So this is amazing and fascinating, and it's tying up my other podcast into this conversation of all of it. And I love that. So talk to me about Perception Predict. You've been under the hood of the technology, I'm sure, and you've got a lot of technicians. And by the way, I did mean to tell you this. When my son entered Colorado School of Mines to be an engineering student 4 years ago, and then ChatGPT, and at first, oh, you can't do that. We're going to bust you. Well, just at the beginning of this semester, they said, just kidding, you can use it. Because if they, think about it. If you said, oh, Jonathan, we caught you using it, you're out. Well, then you'd have to let all the other students go too, probably, because it's just like a calculator. It's part of our society now. And therefore, students should be allowed to use it. The technology.
Yeah, which is and you'll find people on both sides of that divide, right? And I think about, and this may seem unrelated, but I promise it is. If you came from an agricultural family in California, and you're drilling wells deeper and deeper and deeper and extracting water because that's your crop, right? And your whole family and generations and all of your debt and wealth is dependent on doing that. You can get a lot of data around, hey, probably not a good idea to keep pumping water out of a place that doesn't have water. And, there are changes for like globally that makes sense. But to the farmer in the field, it doesn't make sense. And I don't care who you are. There's one universal truth. And I think this crosses every ethnic, country, socioeconomic status, is if you have the ability to make life better for your kid, you will. And the risk for that farmer is I'm gonna be the first of the first in my generation that doesn't make it better for my kids because I refuse to drill a well because of something called climate change. Like that disconnects there. How does that relate to what you're saying? It's the same thing with a teacher. Or that, right? We have these entire infrastructures around education and higher education and endowments into those. And when we can democratize education, and you can't charge $200,000 for a 4-year degree anymore because that knowledge is not only freely available, but better quality, that whole self-interest group, right, becomes stuck. And I think that in my book, I write about this concept of, I believe you believe that. And it could sound really sarcastic, like, I believe you believe. And what I mean,
that's great. I love it.
But what I mean by that is you have to get up, if you can get up close to somebody and go, well, why would a teacher, want to keep somebody from using ChatGPT? And saying I believe you believe that actually means that I've accepted that if I grew up just like Chad did, saw the things Chad did, heard the things he did, took the abuse he got, took the kudos he got, whatever he had in life, I'd probably see it exactly like he does. Yeah. Chad's not crazy. He just has a different belief, right? A point of view. You think about the terrorists that, flew their plane into the Trade Center since September 11th, just, a few days ago, the commemoration of that. Was that crazy? Yes. Was it terrorism? Yes. However, I believe those people weren't crazy.
To them, they really thought they were doing something for their God and their cause and their people and their family. And got
and in that way, if you just turned and said, if a Christian really lived by their belief, like, that's what they were doing, living by a belief. It didn't occur to them, right, that belief structure was wrong, nor could it. And the only way I think you overcome those sort of beliefs is rather than sitting in complete judgment. It doesn't mean you can't call it evil or decide against it, but you really do have to understand, how did they get there? That's why I like the show Breaking Bad. It's one of my all-time favorite shows. And the reason is you get this teacher gets cancer. I think he had cancer, right? And he doesn't want to leave his family with a bunch of bills and health and all that. So he said, I'm going to make meth. And, like that seems sort of, reasonable. And he thinks I'm just going to make it for a little bit, just enough to pay my, and then as you go in each season, he makes one more, like it's just inch by inch, his thinking changes. And like all of a sudden he's doing really evil stuff. But I think if you authentically, at least for me, maybe I'm twisted. If you put yourself in that seat and you make the decision inch by inch, it's not that hard to understand.
To make each next inch down the field. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. How he got there. And so it was a fascinating study in human development, but
so what are the core things? Because I assume you're not just looking at staffing salespeople, right? You look at other roles as well, or is it primarily?
No, we do every role in every organization as long as we have enough data. So we're really taking two sets of data. On one end, we have a proprietary index of over 500 psychographic type of items, all research-based, all validated not to cause undue adverse impact. Everything has some impact, but things that you can reliably measure in humans. So we get a bunch of people doing that job. Could be 100, could be 1,000 salespeople, could be 2,000, right? For any role. And on the other end, so we assess those people and we get this really rich pool of data points about what makes up that person and what makes up that group of people. And then on the other end, we're ingesting actual performance data. So how many deals did they close? What was their customer satisfaction rate? How long did they last in the job? And then what we're doing is feeding that into our AI. Again, think of AI as just advanced mathematics. So we're using things like multivariate regression analysis, which has been around for thousands of years. And we're using compute power to say, out of those now thousands of data sets that are intercorrelated in different ways, what's the pattern? And we produce what we call a performance fingerprint. So now on the hiring side, somebody comes in, we only ask them the questions on an online survey that are statistically correlated to performance for that job, for that role inside that company. And now that we have the applicant's psychographic profile, we're just guessing the pattern. We're saying, okay, you're probably going to sell $275,000 a quarter.
Right.
So we've been doing that for large organizations. Doing that for large organizations. And then over the last 18 months, we decided, well, how could we bring that same power to companies that don't have hundreds or thousands of people and they don't have that kind of data set? And arguably, it's even more important to get hiring right for a small company because you could have two people and that's 50% of your team, right? And so if those two hiring decisions are wrong, it really has an impact. Whereas if you have a 100-person team and two are wrong, it's probably a blip. So what we started to do, and what the mission that we're on now, is we're taking industry by industry and creating families of fingerprints. So as an example, we've done family of fingerprints for the HVAC, plumbing, and electrical trades. And we got hundreds of companies together who agreed to participate, let us assess their technicians, their dispatchers, CSR agents. So we have this rich pool of people, DNA that are doing the job. And those same companies gave us a lot of performance data. And so now we're able to release an industry model. So if you're an HVAC plumber, you can just come in and use that model. The benefit of that is you don't have to go through that long build process because we've already done that with those participating companies. And one of the things we realized when we moved into the SMB market is those companies not only want a prediction model, they also want to post and repost the job advertisement. They want to automate the process of, text message communication with the candidate, scheduling, doing one-way video interview. So at the end of July, we acquired a company, Who Hire, and it's basically all the automations around the hiring process. And so we're embedding now our fingerprint intelligence and our prediction models right into a full functioned ATS system. And so you can come in, log in. It's, $2.99, $3.99 a month sort of thing to have that sort of predictive capability.
Man,
Which is
we've had quite a dialogue because I think about, I am a faithful person. I think we have a unique fingerprint. It's the only one of its kind that ever will be and ever was. Now, you could argue you could program a bot with the same fingerprint, I guess, but that still wouldn't be a human yet. But my point is, when we live within the skills that we're built to be good at, because there's certain things that are nature versus nurture. And
absolutely,
when you can put the right people on the bus, their level of satisfaction, their longevity, the turnover, it makes it so much easier for them to be happy in the role that they're in. And that goes back to what you were talking about, that if more AI takes on more and more roles, it allows human society to say, just focus on what you love and your passion. And instead of going up and making up something that you're not, right? Just have fun in life and align. I mean, Gary Vee said it well, right? He said something like, it's better to make $60,000 a year or 30,000 or 20,000 and be happy.
That's it. And what's in when I think about the world of work specifically, which is where I would say perception and Who Hire play in that realm of what do we do for work? How do we help marry people and companies together in meaningful ways? The big vision would be where we get rid of, or we shorten that cycle of time for somebody to find something that they're really gifted at. And I always go back to, you think about a musician, or somebody that likes music. There's a difference between somebody that's going to, grow up and be in a karaoke sort of environment, somebody that's going to be sort of a local play in the band versus somebody that could be in Carnegie Hall. That takes work, but the person that's going to be in Carnegie Hall, they sort of have something in them that allows them to operate at the top 1%. I would imagine that for every human on the planet, there is something that they would be the top 1% at. They just, life circumstances doesn't necessarily allow them to get there, and they end up in a job, and then that job leads to the next job, and that job leads to the next job. So if we could just help people to say, and there's been attempts in the past where it's like, take this little questionnaire and we'll tell you in high school you should do this or that, but do that in a patterned recognition way that gets it right more often than it gets it wrong.
Yeah. Well, and then if I go forward 5 years and I could envision a PerceptionPredict world that says, hey, everyone, let's index all 340 million people in America, right?
Yeah.
Man, and then map the right person to the right job and say, hey, look, and start sending me emails. Hey, Chad, here's 87 opportunities in America right now that would pay you X, and you could do exactly what you want.
And if you think about it, if we didn't have vested interests, right, like education and healthcare and all these vested interests, if we could just whiteboard, which is a little idealistic, but if you were just going to wipe it all clean and pretend everybody was going to be okay with that,
yeah.
What would you build if you could reimagine it? So imagine somebody in school, and as they start showing a talent or an interest, they actually have an AI-enabled assistant that is out seeking things to feed that, not to influence that, right? Like I'm going to change you into something you're not, but I'm actually going to help you, expose you to things that are right in the wheelhouse of the things that you're interested in, talented at, and I'm going to stretch you because I can see the pattern to these other nearby things, right? So maybe somebody has an interest in biology, but by the time they get sort of through that educational system that's being custom built for them, they actually realize that they like building mechanical things. And they end up in a completely different career set that they might just by themselves not have.
Sure, because they could be one degree off from exactly what the right career for them was. And yet, because of a dad's expectation of them they stayed in something. Like my dad's a doctor and my brother's a doctor. So I started going down that path. Thank goodness for chemistry, because I recognized that was not a pattern I wanted to be part of.
Yeah. And, you can reimagine education. Like right now, I don't know, like the school my kids go to and the teacher they have, it's not because that's the best person in that, that area. Like most of the time they don't have any real life experience in the thing they're teaching. Or if they do, it's very narrow and limited. I would much rather say, if you're going to learn chemistry, let's create it in a world where you're actually learning from the best chemist on the planet that can teach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have access to them in a way that feels very real. And then maybe you have local coaches that sort of help you put it into application. There's no reason they should sit in a class. I watch my kids, they're watching YouTube educational videos and they're jumping from one thing to the next and they're learning really fast and in a way that's, unique to the way they think. And then they walk into the classroom, they're handed a sheet of paper, have somebody at the front of the room droning on, they're looking at a textbook that was published 10 years ago. It's no wonder they don't want to operate in that. And you see that same, we get back to AI in business. If you're still hiring the way you hired 5 years ago, you are way behind the learning curve. Like the world has changed.
The DEI topic comes up here. And I was walking across the street at an event in Washington, D.C. a week ago. And, she had a last minute proposal. And I said, well, what's it on? She said, DEI. I talk about it all the time. And I was like, hey, you should couple up with an AI expert. The guy who co-hosts my podcast wrote a book on AI in business. I believe AI is the great equalizer, because someone who doesn't have a skill set in math or writing or you name it, coupled and augmented by an AI solution, can now outperform. So I think that's another interesting opportunity.
Yeah, there is the area of concern, and I think it's a valid one, is that as you're constructing learning models, that you're embedding some of the biases that are already inherent in society. I don't think you can get away from that completely. What I do think that technology, you can put the AI label next to it if you want to, is that at least we should design our technology in a way that makes the bias more transparent and observable. Because you're always going to have bias. I don't care if you're interviewing somebody as a human, you have bias. You might have walked in, from a bad lunch, like they're not getting a fair shake because you had a burrito for breakfast.
Just because of your attitude for the minute.
But there's so many things that sort of influence that decision making. So there is a balance, like there is with everything.
Well, we at the beginning of the call, you asked me, what would be valuable for your listeners, and I would say after 37 minutes, what we just talked about is valuable for our listeners. So, Jonathan, awesome. I really appreciate you being here, and we went to 30,000 feet and all the way back down to 1 foot. So it's been a lot of fun. I've had a great time having you here. So thanks for sharing so much wisdom with us today.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for the invite and nice to catch up again.
All right, everybody. We've been talking with Jonathan Porter-Whistman, the CEO of PerceptionPredict. That's the website, PerceptionPredict.com. Yes, Jonathan?
.ai.
.ai. Okay, there we go. Follow the cool kids. That's right. All right, everybody. We'll catch you on the next AI for Sales podcast.
Hey, you made it this far in your AI for Sales journey. Want to augment your sales growth? First, leave us a review and then visit www.scalex.ai to claim your free strategy session today.